The rain had been falling for hours, turning the red dirt trails of Arizona into rivers of mud. Ethan Ward pushed his weary horse forward, his hat pulled low, water streaming down his face. Every sound of thunder echoed through his chest, reminding him of cannons from the war long behind him. He had no home, no family, only the worn saddle beneath him and a trail that never seemed to end. Nights like this had a way of pulling old ghosts from the corners of a man's mind, ghosts he tried hard to forget. The wind howled through the canyon, slicing through his coat as lightning cracked open the sky. He wasn't looking for anything. Not hope, not trouble, just a dry place to rest his head. But fate has a cruel sense of humor. Near the edge of the river crossing, he saw a movement, a shape in the storm. At first he thought it was an animal, maybe a lost horse. But when lightning struck again, the flash revealed a figure, small, fragile, and human. Ethan's heart tightened. He slowed his horse, squinting through the rain. There, half buried in the mud, lay a young woman. Her dark hair clung to her face, her body trembling uncontrollably. She was barefoot, her dress torn and soaked through, and the way she stared up at the sky made him think she'd given up. For a moment, he just sat there gripping the reins. Helping her could mean trouble. Out here, a stranger was as dangerous as a loaded gun. But the sight of her, so broken and alone, stripped away his hesitation. He slid off his horse, boots sinking deep into the wet earth. "Easy now," he murmured, raising his hands so she could see them. The woman didn't move, didn't even flinch. Her lips trembled, her eyes wide and hollow, like she couldn't tell if he was real. Then as he took another step, she collapsed into the mud, her body going limp. Ethan's breath caught. He knelt beside her, pressing 2 fingers to her neck. A faint pulse, weak but there. Without another thought, he lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, her skin cold as river stone. He carried her to his horse, mounted carefully, and rode toward the cluster of pines he'd passed earlier. The storm whipped at his back, but he held her close, whispering to calm her, though she couldn't hear him. Every mile felt heavier than the last, but he didn't stop until he reached the shelter of the trees. Under the thick branches, he set her down gently and went to work. He tore open his saddlebag, pulling out the few supplies he had, a blanket, some jerky, a flask of whiskey, and a handful of matches. His hands shook as he built a small fire, shielding it from the rain with his coat. When the flames finally caught, they painted her face in trembling light. She looked young, no more than 20, with a face that carried both innocence and something wild, something untamed by the world. He poured a little whiskey between her lips, then wrapped her in his blanket. For a long while she didn't move. Ethan sat beside her, watching the fire dance in her reflection. The storm raged on outside, thunder growling, wind screaming through the canyon, but here under the pines the world felt smaller, quieter. He wondered who she was, where she came from, and what kind of pain could drive a woman into the wilderness alone on a night like this. Hours passed before she stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, then slowly found him. Ethan froze, unsure what to say. "You're safe now," he said softly. She blinked, trying to sit up, but her arms gave out. "Don't push yourself," he murmured, holding her steady. "You've been through hell. Rest." For a long moment she just looked at him, not with fear, but with a strange curiosity, as if she couldn't decide whether to trust him. Finally, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain, "My name's Mara." Ethan nodded, repeating it under his breath. Mara. The name felt right somehow. Soft, but strong. He poured her a bit of warm water from his canteen and handed it to her. She took it slowly, her fingers brushing his. There was something in her touch, fragile, hesitant, that stirred something inside him he hadn't felt in years. When she finished, he saw her shoulders tremble, not from cold, but from memory. "They were chasing me," she whispered suddenly, her voice shaking. "I ran as far as I could. Then the storm came. Ethan didn't ask who they were. He didn't need to. He'd seen enough cruelty in this land to understand. Instead, he nodded once, his jaw tightening. "You don't have to talk now," he said quietly. "You're safe here." She looked at him for a long time, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Then slowly she lay back down, her eyes closing. The firelight softened her face, and Ethan found himself studying every detail, the curve of her cheek, the cut on her temple, the faint bruise on her arm. He felt anger stir, not at her, but at whatever had done this to her. Outside, the storm began to ease. The wind died down to a whisper, and the rain became a steady patter against the leaves. Ethan leaned back, staring into the fire. He had spent years wandering, avoiding people, avoiding the past. But something about Mara, the way she'd looked at him, the trust she hadn't meant to give, pulled him out of the shadows he'd been living in. As the night deepened, her breathing grew steady. Ethan stayed awake, keeping watch. Every now and then, she would shiver in her sleep, and he would pull the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Somewhere between the flicker of firelight and the fading storm, he realized the emptiness inside him felt different. Not gone, but quieter. By dawn, the rain had stopped. The sun rose pale and uncertain over the soaked landscape. Steam lifted from the ground, and the world smelled of wet earth and pine. Mara was still asleep, her face peaceful for the first time since he'd found her. Ethan stood slowly, stretching his back. He looked down at her, this stranger who had fallen into his life out of nowhere, and felt a weight settle in his chest. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe she'd leave when she was strong enough. Maybe trouble would follow. But for now, in that fragile moment between night and morning, Ethan Ward felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The dawn came slowly, pulling back the grey veil of night. The air smelled of wet pine and ash, the kind of morning that made the earth feel reborn. Ethan Ward sat near the dying fire, his coat still damp from the storm, watching Mara sleep. She looked different in daylight, her face softer, her breathing calm, as if she'd finally escaped something that had been chasing her for years. He didn't know how long she'd been running, but he could tell by her eyes when she woke, haunted, cautious, full of quiet pain, that the storm outside wasn't the only one she'd survived. She stirred at the crack of a twig, eyes fluttering open. For a moment she looked lost, uncertain of where she was. Then her gaze found Ethan, and her shoulders relaxed just slightly. "You stayed," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Ethan smiled faintly. "Didn't seem right to leave." She looked away, hiding a tear that rolled down her cheek. The morning light caught it before it fell, turning it to gold. He wanted to ask her what had happened, but something told him she'd tell him when she was ready. Out here, words weren't currency. Actions were. They shared breakfast by the fire, coffee, jerky, and the last of his dry bread. Mara ate slowly, her hands trembling slightly, as if the simple act of eating in peace was something she hadn't done in a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of confession. "I was married," she said softly. "He sold me, traded me to pay his debts. When I ran, he sent men after me, said he'd rather see me dead than free." Ethan's chest tightened. He looked at her hands, calloused but delicate, resting in her lap. "You don't owe that man your life," he said, voice low but firm. "You did what you had to do." She looked up at him then, really looked, as if testing whether his words were truth or mercy. What she saw must have satisfied her, because she nodded faintly. "You don't know what it's like to be hunted," she whispered. Ethan's gaze drifted toward the mountains. "Maybe I do," he said. "Not the same way, but close enough." She didn't ask what he meant. Maybe she saw the ghosts in his eyes. Maybe she didn't need to. The silence between them said more than words could. They spent the next few days repairing what little shelter he had, patching the roof, gathering firewood, keeping the horses close. Mara worked hard, stronger than she looked, moving with quiet determination. At night, when the wind died and the fire crackled low, she would tell him stories, not of her pain, but of the stars, of how her mother once told her each light in the sky was a soul that refused to be forgotten. Ethan listened, his heart caught between sorrow and awe. He hadn't believed in much for years, but when she spoke, he almost did. One evening, while the horizon glowed in the dying light, Mara asked, "Why did you help me?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He stared at the sky, searching for the right words. Because I saw someone who deserved a chance, he said finally. And maybe I wanted to prove to myself that I could still do something right. She smiled faintly, her eyes soft. You already have. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something warm stir inside him, something close to peace. But peace in the frontier was fragile. The morning it broke, the world seemed too still. Ethan was fixing the corral when he heard it, the faint echo of hooves, far but steady. His gut tightened. He turned to see dust rising in the valley below. 5 riders armed and fast. Mara came running from the cabin, her face pale. It's them, she breathed. He sent them. Ethan looked toward the rifle leaning against the fence. He didn't hesitate. Get inside, he ordered. She shook her head. You should let them take me. If you fight, they'll kill you. He looked at her, really looked, and something fierce rose in his eyes. No one's taking you. Not while I'm breathing. The riders reached the clearing just as the wind began to rise again. Their leader, a scar-faced man with a black hat and a cruel grin, called out, We're looking for a runaway. You've got her, don't you? Ethan didn't move. Ain't no one here but me, the man smirked. Don't lie, cowboy. She's worth $100 dead, 200 alive. Ethan's grip tightened on the rifle. You're not taking her. The man's smile faded. Then I guess you die with her. The first shot came fast, slicing through the air. Ethan dove for cover, returning fire. The canyon exploded with noise. Bullets splintering wood, horses screaming, echoes bouncing off the cliffs. Mara screamed his name, ducking behind the wagon. One man fell, then another. Ethan reloaded, firing again, his hands steady despite the chaos. Years of battle had hardened him, but this time it wasn't survival that drove him. It was her. He wouldn't lose the only good thing that had found him in years. When the dust finally settled, silence returned to the valley. The wind carried the smell of gunpowder and blood. Ethan stood for a moment, chest heaving, before his knees gave out. A crimson stain spread across his shoulder. Mara ran to him, dropping to her knees. No, no, she whispered, pressing her hand against the wound. Stay with me. He winced, managing a weak smile. You're safe now. Tears rolled down her face, mixing with the dirt and sweat. You didn't just save me, she said through trembling lips. You saved yourself. He wanted to answer, but his strength was fading fast. The fire behind them flickered low, its glow dancing across their faces. She held him there until the light of dawn crept across the horizon, her hand gripping his as if sheer will could keep him tethered to this world. When the first rays of sun touched the ground, Ethan's eyes fluttered open one last time. You were the storm, he whispered faintly, and the calm after. Later, when the riders' bodies were buried and the valley grew quiet again, Mara built a small cairn beside the river, a marker for the man who had given everything to save her. She sat there for a long time, the wind brushing through her hair, tears falling freely. The sky above was pale blue, and for the first time the world didn't feel cruel. She whispered into the breeze, You didn't just find me, Ethan. You found yourself. Years later, travelers passing through that valley spoke of a woman who lived alone near the river. They said she guarded a grave marked by a single stone, that she sang to it when the storms came, her voice carrying across the plains. Some said she was mourning. Others said she was waiting, but those who listened closely, who heard her song echo through the rain, knew the truth. She wasn't mourning or waiting. She was remembering the man who taught her that love, even born in the darkest storm, could still burn bright enough to light the desert forever.